We are picking your brains, Dr. Mukesh Garg, for the readers and viewers of Bharat Times. We're discussing Afghanistan, the latest development on the international scene. According to you, what is the situation in Afghanistan? Who is responsible?
Afghanistan situation, as we all can see, is a global issue now. It's not just restricted to Afghanistan, because it will have a flow-on effect on the region as well as the rest of the world in terms of what the US policies are, what's going to work, and what is the mindset of the people in the country and people from other parts of the world who carry similar kind of mindset. I think Afghanistan is now probably 40 years behind where it should be. And the last 20 years of effort that everyone is reading about and trying to understand, it hasn't worked. It hasn't delivered anything. If Taliban could take over the whole of Afghanistan in just 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, true. Do you think America has abandoned Afghani people?
If the Taliban could take over Afghanistan so quickly, then probably the US was not able to do what was required to be done. So the military should have had this power, and the politicians in the country should have had enough power to bring the people together so that they could push back the Talibanis, but that didn't work. So it looks like they just left it too early.
Do you think it was the economics of it or any other reasons behind the US leaving?
Ultimately, it will be economic, because getting into Afghan is somewhat economic. Leaving Afghanistan is also somewhat economics, because over the last 20 years, the US have spent over $1 trillion with nothing coming back in return, tangibly.
Yes, true. Okay, coming to the Taliban-Trump deal. Do you think it was actually a deal? If you read what was agreed upon, it was hardly any deal. It was kind of giving in to Taliban, was it not?
Possible. And this is the point I was making. If Taliban could take over within 2 weeks' time the whole of the country, it means it was just a matter of, look, we're finishing off on this day and you can come and rule. I could be wrong, but the way things have unfolded in the country, it looks like as if it was a deal and it was all agreed upon, and it was a formality of one process ending and another one starting.
Yes, and in Afghanistan, there are a couple of places where they're still fighting Taliban, the anti-Taliban forces. But coming back to the recognition of Taliban establishment, when it comes to that, do you think America has any reason or moral authority not to recognize, because they did the deal with Taliban practically last year, 15, 16 months ago?
You're right. Even if there was no deal, to be honest, if they, despite after 20 years of efforts, if Taliban is back into power, in the interest of the people of Afghanistan, not in the interest of Taliban, but in the interest of the people of Afghanistan, the US and the international community somewhat have to sit on the table with the Talibani regime and do things which is in the interest of the commoners of Afghanistan. And from that point of view, I would support it.
Yeah, sorry. India actually attended the signing of the deal as an observer on the invite of Qatar. Do you think India should also recognize as soon as it's possible for India to recognize?
For the same reason, as I mentioned, means not in the interest of the Taliban, not in the interest of anyone else, but the interest of the Afghan people. If India doesn't deal with Afghanistan under the current regime in Afghanistan, then the people of Afghanistan will suffer, whether it's coming from economics point of view, trade, or any kind of development work India has been doing in Afghanistan for the last 20 years. All that will come at an end, which is not in the favor of the country.
Yes, Dr. Garg, you did mention the threat, the real threat of Mujahideen and terrorism. Is it just confined to the South Asian, Central Asian region, or you think even up to America and everywhere else we can see the terrorism attacks?
If we go back to 2020 years back, the whole reason behind US coming to Afghanistan was the 9/11 attack in New York.
Yes.
Right? So the terrorism does not have any boundary, which we have seen in 20 years. And going forward, it won't be a South Asian matter. In fact, it is going to be a wider impact, as we have seen in the European continent, how the North Africans have pushed their way into the European continent as migrants or refugees, and the same thing would happen. What will bring with that could be spread of terrorism mindset or any kind of problems. So it's a global issue now.
Okay, what are the real dangers for India, this rise of Taliban? Do you think
The rise of Taliban,
we'll have issues in Kashmir, we'll have issues in West Bengal, we may have sleeper cells trying to activate themselves in Maharashtra, wherever there has been issues in the recent past?
we have seen that Chinese regime has been okay with the new regime in Afghanistan much quicker. I also read they haven't shut down their embassy. Pakistan hasn't done it. And Pakistan and China have their own agenda when it comes to India. So yeah, they have their own mindset.
Pakistan is actually calling its victory in Afghanistan.
That is correct. So that means it's a real threat for India. Any of the Pakistani activities against the Indian soil will get the support from the Talibanis, because this is what their victory is.
You would have seen some statements coming out of Jammu and Kashmir politicians. Mehbooba Mufti has said, people will rise against the establishment in Delhi, the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Do you think she has any logic in that?
This is unfounded. This is about her own say in the Jammu Kashmir politics coming to an end, that these heads are popping up against the Indian government. What good example can India offer than the rest of the world that being such a complex country, India continues to remain a democracy and a secular country? And I guess if you think about the Muslim population, whether it is the Shias or the Sunnis, they find themselves to be the safest in India, whereas in other parts of the world, especially the Muslim countries, either the Shias are killing Sunnis or the Sunnis are killing the Shias. So Mehbooba Mufti, whatever she has to say, this is not based on what the world has seen as facts about the Islamic countries.
The Citizenship Amendment Act, given the current situation that we see today, Hazaras are under threat, there will be other minorities, Muslims can be prosecuted by the Taliban. So do you think that was error in judgment by the Indian government?
It is not an error in judgment. When the partition was done, partition wasn't done on the basis of only Sunni Muslims and the rest of the Indian community. No, it was between Hindus and Muslims. So if Jinnah had said, look, I'm only going to create an East and West Pakistan on the basis of Sunni Muslims, we don't want to take Shias, then it would have been a different thing. When it was all about Hindus and Muslims, a split of the country between Muslims and non-Muslims, then the Shias or Hazaras or Sunnis or Ahmadiyas, they all belong to the partitioned India. So I don't see a problem there. Having said that, the CAA was probably one of the best decisions of the Indian government, when the Indian government is meeting its obligation towards the minorities of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, who were left to live in those countries at the time of partition. So the Indian community should realize that that was a very good decision of the Modi government. And we have in reality seen what's happening to the Hindus and the Sikhs in Afghanistan. They're just trying to get back to India so that they can save their lives. Right. Even the rule maker in Afghanistan, Mr. Khalsa, has left Afghanistan and he has moved to India, and he's grateful to the Indian government.
True. Okay, Dr. Garg, can we talk about the rebuilding of various rights that seem to have disappeared within 1 week with the rise of Taliban? Rights of women and girls, education and jobs. How do you see the future of women and girls in Afghanistan, and what can be done?
This is so unfortunate. Means, as I mentioned earlier, Afghanistan is going to the dark ages where women, which is half of a country's population, are treated the way they are treated. They have no right to treat women the way the Talibanis have treated. And unless they change their mindset completely, it's not going to happen. Do they want Sharia to be imposed in Afghanistan, where women can't come out of their house, they can't work, they can't get educated. And if this is what the mindset of the Taliban regime is, then there is no future for women, as it has been for 6 years when Taliban were in power in Afghanistan. And if people outside of Afghanistan, if they are supporting Taliban, that's because they also want Sharia in their countries, which means Muslims in India, if they are supporting Taliban, as you would have seen from the media post, even in the Uttar Pradesh, if this is what they want, do they want Sharia in India? And if they want Sharia in India, do they want their women to be locked down in the house, not go out of the house, don't get education, don't have employment? Is this what the people outside of Afghanistan want for their women by supporting the Talibanis? So that's a question they need to answer to themselves. It's easier to say, okay, Taliban has done the right thing, imposing Sharia law in the way it is, but do you want it for your daughters and for your wives? They would say no, probably.
Yes, they have said women and girls will get all the rights within the Islamic limitations. That's what
so Islamic limitation means the full imposition of Sharia law.
That's right. Okay, economically, if you look at Afghanistan, what do you think will be the future in 5 years, 10 years, and what can be done to help them?
Afghanistan has one of the lowest GDP in the world. It ranks around 113th based on 2019 data, with a $500 GDP per capita, which is one of the lowest in the world. And most of that was comprising of the aids the government or Afghanistan was receiving from the rest of the world. So with the departure of the US and the takeover of Afghanistan by Taliban, I guess all this aid is going to come to an end. At least it won't be directly to the Afghan government. It will probably go to individuals, like you and I may donate $100 or $1,000 to a family in Afghanistan. So that's all dried up. Full stop from last week.
Yeah.
And the GDP may go down to half of what it is today. So that's a huge cost to the Afghani economy. And building that trust so that businesses can invest in Afghanistan, it's going to be highly unlikely for the next 10 years. Who's going to suffer? The 41 million people in Afghanistan are going to suffer because of that. It's not going to be quick. It's going to take a very long time, and the Taliban regime has to show evidence of gaining that trust, unless they're getting the money from Pakistan, which itself is bankrupt, or maybe get the money from Chinese regime, who would continue to support the Talibanis in their own interests. So maybe the money will come from China and not come from any part of the world.
Or the opium trade that they do.
Or through the opium trade. So an opium trade is going to ruin lives of young and old and families. That is a different level of worry now for us.
Okay, for the humanitarian reasons, what help do you think India and Australia can provide to the people of Afghanistan?
It's money going into the wrong hands is not going to help anyone. As I mentioned, if Afghanis people need help, it had to be at an individual level, or NGOs working in Afghanistan who get the aid, and the right NGOs, whether it be the Red Cross or World Health has some programs. That probably would be the safest way, so that money is channeled in the right direction.
Taliban, there can still be bottlenecks. NGOs will be closely observed by them.
Definitely, which means people are going to suffer. So India can't do anything, US can't do anything, Australia can't do anything. What can we do? Can we bring in people from these countries as refugees to Australia, to India? You're talking about 40 million people. Yeah. And Australia has a population of only 22 million people. That's another challenge.
Correct. So finally, Dr. Garg, before you go, do you think this is a complete failure of international diplomacy since the 1980s? First, the Soviet Union led the thing in Afghanistan, and then the Americans came, and it is absolute catastrophic, abject failure of international diplomacy. Do you think?
It is beyond doubt. What happened in Vietnam during the Vietnam War and the failure of Americans in Vietnam, they learned a lesson, but probably that lesson did not remain in their head for long. And the British were there, the Americans were there. Australia, of course, had a very low level of presence in Afghanistan. They could have pushed harder when Talibanis were growing their foothold on the Afghani soil, they should have pushed back instead of just abandoning the country and deciding to pull out of Afghanistan. So this is a complete failure. This is a complete failure. And not only the failure of the international community, I think that even the people of Afghanistan are responsible for that. No one is going to fight my war. I have to fight my war. Any country that we see is independent. The people of the country have fought their war against the oppressor. So the Talibanis are there and the people of Afghanistan have to fight back. It's a joint responsibility, and probably the most responsible people are the local Afghan population, who haven't done enough to support the US at the time. They thought probably US will look after them for the next 100 years. It didn't work that way. So it's a responsibility of everyone. We can't put the blame on the Americans and the British alone. The people of Afghanistan, they should have done the right thing. They should have stood up against what is happening. And this is where the fundamentalism becomes a challenge, because people have that mindset and they're okay with the Taliban regime. But not everyone is okay with the Taliban regime, but majority seems to be okay with the Taliban regime. That's why they're happy to give in. So it's a question for future countries. In the future, there would be other countries that would have similar kind of a problem. The people have to fight back. Lives will be lost. India did not get independence without nothing. India had to lose millions of people in the process of getting independence. That's what we saw in 75 years back. And this, if happens in the future, people of the country have to fight back. It has to be a joint effort.
Yes, on that note, Dr. Garg, thank you very much for your time, and we'll catch up on another topic on another day.